I want to be clear about one thing before I begin. I am not a confrontational person. I have never been a confrontational person. I spent 34 years as a high school librarian in Tarrant County, Texas, which is a profession that selects heavily for patience, for the willingness to deal with unreasonable requests without losing composure, and for the specific skill of redirecting difficult people toward better outcomes without making them feel redirected. I am good at all of those things. I am good at them because I have practiced them for 3 decades in a building full of teenagers who had not yet learned that other people's needs existed, and because the practice of that skill set for that long changes a person's baseline response to conflict from reactive to measured. I do not yell. I do not send threatening notes. I do not show up at doors in anger. I document, I communicate clearly, I give people the opportunity to do the right thing, and I reserve the more decisive responses for the situations where the gentler ones have been exhausted. My name is Lorraine Beckett. I am 63 years old. I am recently retired 14 months ago after 34 years at the library, which was the right time to retire and the right length to have stayed. My husband Gerald passed away 6 years ago, which means I run the house and the property and everything that involves entirely on my own, which I am competent to do and which I do not find burdensome, except when something arises that requires more physical strength than I have, at which point I call my son Marcus, who lives 20 minutes away and is reliably available. Marcus is 31 and works in logistics and is a good son in the practical and reliable sense that matters more than the sentimental one. I live in Thornbury Oaks, which is a 72-home HOA development in Tarrant County that was built in the early 1990s and has the particular character of developments built in that era: solid construction, mature trees, established landscaping, the kind of neighborhood that looks like it has been lived in because it has been lived in for 30 years by people who bought homes and stayed in them. I have been here 22 years. I know most of my neighbors by name and several of them well enough to call friends. The neighborhood functions because people in it generally treat each other with the consideration that proximity requires, which is not warmth necessarily, but a basic awareness that you are going to see these people every day and that your choices about how you behave affect people who did not choose to be affected by them. Pamela Voss moved into the house 3 doors down 2 years ago. She was the third owner of that property since I moved in, and she arrived with a silver Mercedes-Benz GLC that she drove with the specific confidence of someone who has never once worried about where they were going to park, because things had always arranged themselves. She was friendly in the way that people are friendly when they are also somewhat certain of their own importance. She introduced herself, she was pleasant, she remembered my name the second time she saw me, and she appeared to regard the neighborhood as a place that existed partly for her benefit, which is an attitude that in small doses is merely an aspect of self-confidence and in larger doses becomes something else. My driveway situation is specific and worth explaining. My house is a corner lot, the same as several of the stories you may have heard, and my driveway is a wide one. It was expanded by the previous owners to accommodate a boat they kept in the side yard, and the expansion was done with concrete that added approximately 8 feet to the original driveway width, creating a driveway that could comfortably fit 3 cars side by side across its full width. When Gerald was alive, we used all of it regularly. Since Gerald passed, I use approximately half of it, my own car on the left side, as I have always parked it, and the right half available but not regularly occupied. The driveway connects at both ends. The front connects to the main street and the left side connects to the cross street, making it a slight through configuration that is not as pronounced as a true corner through drive, but is wide enough that a vehicle parked on the right side still has room to exit from either street end. This configuration is, I have come to understand, what made my driveway attractive to Pamela Voss when she had guests. 3 doors down, her own driveway accommodated 2 cars, which was sufficient for normal days, but not for the occasions when she had 4 or 5 guests and the street was busy. On those occasions, the extra width of my driveway was apparently visible from the street, in a way that read as available space to someone who was looking for it, and who had not fully registered the distinction between available space and her space. The first time I noticed a car I did not recognize on the right side of my driveway was a Sunday afternoon in October of Pamela's first year in the neighborhood. I came home from church to find a gray Volkswagen Tiguan parked in the right half of my driveway, aligned neatly as though it belonged there, with no note on the windshield or any indication of whose it was. I parked in my own spot on the left, went inside, and waited to see what happened. Approximately 2 hours later, a couple I did not recognize came out of Pamela's house, got into the Volkswagen, and drove away. They looked at me briefly as they backed out, and there was no indication in their expression that they found anything irregular about the situation. I did not act on the first incident immediately because one incident is not a pattern. I noted it and waited. The second incident was 2 weeks later. A different car, a red Ford Explorer, in the same right half position, same Sunday afternoon timing, same Pamela guest pattern. This time I went to Pamela's door and knocked. She answered, and I explained pleasantly and directly that my driveway was private property and that I had noticed on 2 occasions that guests of hers had parked in it without my permission. I said I did not want to make a large issue of it, but I wanted her to know that the space was mine, and I would appreciate her letting her guests know it was not available for their use. She said, "Oh, Lorraine, I'm so sorry I didn't even think about it. Of course, I'll tell them." She was warm and apparently genuinely apologetic. She told them nothing, or what she told them did not change anything, because 3 weeks after that conversation, a silver Hyundai Santa Fe was on the right side of my driveway on a Saturday afternoon, and Pamela had 4 people at her house for what appeared to be a lunch gathering. I went to Pamela's door again. She answered and I said, "Pamela, there is another guest car in my driveway." She said, "Oh, really? I'm sorry." "Lorraine, they must not have seen," I said. "Pamela, this is the 3rd time. I spoke to you about this 3 weeks ago. I need the guest to move their car now, and I need this to stop." She said, of course, she was so sorry she would take care of it immediately. The guest moved the car. The lunch continued. 6 weeks passed. I began to think the pattern had broken because the incidents had stopped. Then Pamela had a dinner party in December. I counted 4 cars I did not recognize in and around her house that evening. 2 were on the street in front of her house. 1 was in her driveway. 1 was on the right half of mine. I stood at my front window and looked at it. 3 direct conversations, 3 apologies, 1 recurrence. I called Marcus. Marcus came over that evening and I told him the situation. He listened in the way that Marcus listens, without interrupting, without offering solutions before the description is complete, which is a quality I have always appreciated in him. When I finished, he said, "Mom, what do you want to do?" I said I had a few ideas and I wanted to know if any of them were practical. He said, "Let's hear them." I said I wanted to put something physical across the right side of the driveway to prevent parking in that section. I said it needed to be something that was removable when I wanted to use that side, because Gerald's family visited twice a year and needed extra parking, but that was otherwise in place. Marcus said, "Like posts or a chain." I said I had been thinking about something more substantial. I said I had seen decorative brick pillars with a removable chain between them on a neighbor's property in another neighborhood, and I thought something like that would be appropriate for the look of my house. Marcus said he could build that. I said I knew he could. Marcus is competent at construction in the way of men who grew up watching their father maintain a property and who absorbed the skills through proximity without making a formal study of them. He is not a contractor, but he builds things correctly, carefully, and with attention to appearance. We spent 2 evenings that week planning the pillars, 2 36-inch square brick pillars, approximately 42 inches tall, built on poured concrete footings, set 18 inches deep, positioned at the front edge of the right half of the driveway, with a heavy-duty removable chain between them that attached to eyebolts mortared into each pillar. The chain would hang at bumper height and would be clearly visible as a barrier. The pillars would be built from brick that matched the brick on my house foundation. I had half a pallet of it in the garage from a repair project Gerald had done years ago. The aesthetic result would be a permanent and attractive feature that said, clearly and without ambiguity, that this side of the driveway was not a public parking area. I sent the HOA's management company a notification of the planned improvement before Marcus began work. The covenants permitted decorative masonry features on residential driveways with a standard notification period of 15 days. I gave 30 days, submitted a sketch, and received an acknowledgement. Nothing in the covenants prohibited what I was planning. Marcus and I built the pillars over a long weekend in January. He dug the footings on Saturday morning, I mixed the concrete and he set it while I held the forms, and we let it cure through Sunday. Monday we laid brick, Marcus doing the mortar work while I handed him brick in sequence, which is not a skilled job but is necessary, and I was glad to do it. By Monday afternoon both pillars were built, plumb and level, with the eyebolts properly set and cured. Tuesday I applied a clear masonry sealer. Wednesday Marcus came back and we hung the chain, a heavy galvanized steel chain with a padlock on the near pillar, giving me the ability to unlock and remove it when the space was needed and replace it when it was not. The pillars looked exactly as I had hoped. The brick matched. The chain sat at the right height. The installation had a permanent, considered quality that said this was not a hasty response to a situation, but a deliberate improvement to the property by someone who had thought about what she wanted and had built it correctly. I photographed the completed installation and sent a copy to the HOA management company with a note that the improvement had been completed within the approved parameters. The management company acknowledged receipt and filed it in the property record. That Thursday evening, Pamela Voss came to my door. She had apparently seen the pillars go up over the previous week and had been, I suspected, watching the progress with a specific interest. She was pleasant at the door in the way she was always pleasant, which meant the pleasantness was a layer over something that was not quite as pleasant. She said, "Lorraine, those pillars are really lovely." I said, "Thank you. I was happy with how they'd turned out." She said, Are you keeping the chain there all the time?" I said the chain would be in place whenever the space was not needed for my own guests, which was most of the time. She said, "Oh, because I'd mentioned to a few people that they could park in the extra space on that side when they come over." I looked at her for a moment. I said, "Pamela, that space has never been available to your guests. I have asked you to keep them out of my driveway 3 times. She said, "I know, and I was working on communicating that, but it's just such a convenient space." I said, "The pillars and the chain communicate it now. Your guests will see that the space is closed and they will park elsewhere." She said, "But what if someone really needs it?" I said, "Then they can park on the street." She looked at me with the expression of someone receiving information they do not want and said, "I see." She went home. 2 weeks later, Pamela had a birthday party. I knew it was a birthday party because there was a happy birthday balloon cluster tied to her mailbox, and because 6 cars arrived over the course of an hour on a Saturday afternoon. All 6 parked on the street or in her driveway. None attempted my driveway because the pillars and the chain were visible from the street and communicated exactly what I had intended them to communicate. I was in my living room reading when the party guests arrived, and I watched through the front window as each arriving car assessed the street, found a spot, and parked without approaching my driveway. It was the most satisfying sequence of events I had witnessed in a long time, and it required no action on my part whatsoever. The pillars did the communicating. I read my book. But what happened 3 days after the birthday party was something I had not planned for and had not anticipated, and which required a different kind of response than anything I had prepared. I came home on a Tuesday afternoon from my garden club meeting. I had joined the Tarrant County Master Gardeners program after retirement, and the Tuesday meetings was something I looked forward to, and found Pamela's silver Mercedes-Benz GLC parked inside my driveway on the right side, past the chain. Past the chain. The chain was on the ground, not broken, unhooked. The padlock was open, hanging from the eyebolt on the near pillar. The chain lay on the driveway surface in a loop. The Mercedes was parked in the space beyond it. I sat in my car in the street for a moment, not pulling into my own driveway, looking at this scene and processing what it meant. The padlock had not been forced. The padlock had been opened. I had a key to that padlock on my keychain and one in the kitchen drawer. There were no other keys, which meant Pamela had not opened the padlock. which meant Pamela had not used a key. Which meant, if I was going to be accurate about what I was looking at, that Pamela had either picked the padlock, which was a master lock number 3 and was not a sophisticated lock, but was also not something that opened accidentally, or she had found another way to open a hasp-style chain without the key. I pulled out my phone and called Marcus. Karen parked in my driveway again, so I bricked it off and left her trapped. Marcus arrived in 12 minutes, which was faster than I expected, and which told me he had understood from my voice that this was not a general update call. I was still in my car in the street when he pulled up behind me. He got out, looked at the driveway, looked at the chain on the ground, looked at the Mercedes and said, "Mom." I said, "I know." He said, "Did you open the chain?" I said, "No." He said, "Is your key still on your ring?" I checked. "Yes," he said, "and the one in the kitchen." We went inside and checked. "Yes," he said, "then she either picked it or shimmied it." I said I thought shimmied. A simple master number 3 hasp padlock can sometimes be opened by working the hasp itself, particularly if someone with some determination applies lateral pressure while lifting, and it was the most accessible method without any specialist knowledge. Marcus said, "Either way, she's in there without your permission." I said yes. Marcus said, "What do you want to do?" I said I had a specific idea. He said, "Let's hear it." I said, "We relocked the chain. We put the chain back in place across the driveway entrance, properly secured, with the Mercedes inside. We go inside, we have dinner, and then we see what Pamela does when she wants her car back." Marcus looked at me for a moment with the expression of a son who is reassessing his understanding of his mother. He said, "Mom, are you sure?" I said I was completely sure. I said the Mercedes was on my property without my permission, that Pamela had opened my chain without authorization to put it there, and that relocking the chain was simply returning my property to the secured state it had been in before Pamela had tampered with it. I said I was not trapping Pamela's car as an act of hostility. I was securing my property, and the consequence of Pamela's unauthorized entry was that her car was on the secured side of my property, which was the foreseeable result of parking inside a locked barrier on someone else's property. Marcus said, "You know she's going to come over here demanding you open it." I said I was counting on it. He said, "And then what?" I said that depended on how the conversation went. Marcus helped me reattach the chain. We threaded it through the eyebolts, and I snapped the padlock shut. Then we went inside, and I made dinner. I made a pot roast because Tuesday is a pot roast kind of evening when I have been to the garden club and want something that has been cooking while I was away, and because there is something specifically stabilizing about a proper meal when the world is behaving irritatingly. Marcus stayed because the pot roast was happening and because he wanted to see the rest of the evening unfold, which I understood. We were halfway through dinner at 7:15 when the doorbell rang. I took my time getting to the door. Not rudely, I am not a rude woman, but I did not rush. I set my napkin on the table and went to the door at the pace of a person who is not particularly concerned about what is on the other side of it. I opened the door. Pamela was there. She was dressed as if she had been going somewhere or had come from somewhere. She had a coat on and was holding her car keys in one hand in a way that suggested she had been anticipating a quick and simple transaction involving her car and had not yet registered that the transaction was going to be neither quick nor simple. She said, "Lorraine, there seems to be a problem with your chain. My car is on the inside." I said yes. I said I had come home and found the chain on the ground and her car inside and had secured the chain, which was the correct state for the chain to be in. She said, "Can you open it so I can get my car?" I said, "Pamela, can you tell me how your car got inside the chain?" She said there had been a small issue with the lock and it had come open. I said a padlock does not come open by itself. She said she had applied pressure to the chain to check whether it was secure and it had released. I said that was an interesting description of picking a padlock. She said she had not picked anything, she had simply pressed on the chain. I said, "Pamela, the chain was padlocked. If it released under pressure, that's a security concern I need to address. But I also need to understand how you came to be pressing on my padlock chain in the first place." She said, "Lorraine, can we just deal with my car?" I said we could deal with her car after we dealt with the question of how her car had come to be inside my lock chain. She looked at me with the specific expression of a person who has run a gambit that has not produced the expected result and who is recalibrating. She said, "I needed to park somewhere and I didn't think it would be a big deal for just an hour. I said you needed to park somewhere, so you forced open my padlock chain and parked inside my private property barrier. She said, I didn't force it, I said, Pamela, I am going to call the Tarrant County Sheriff's Department and report an unauthorized entry to my private property. While I do that, you are welcome to wait on the porch or in your car on the street, not on my driveway. When the deputy arrives, you can describe the chain situation to them and I will describe it to them, and we will let them sort out the sequence of events. She stared at me. She said, You're calling the police over a parking spot? I said, I am calling the police because someone forced open my property security and entered my driveway without permission. The parking is incidental. I went inside and called the Tarrant County Sheriff's non-emergency line while Marcus watched from the kitchen doorway with an expression I had never seen on his face before, which was something between pride and genuine surprise. I described the situation to the dispatcher, unauthorized entry to private property. A lock chain on my driveway had been opened without my permission. The vehicle in question was still on my property. The dispatcher said a deputy would be out within the hour. I went back to dinner. Pamela sat on the porch for approximately 4 minutes and then went back to her house, presumably to wait, because there was nothing else for her to do. The deputy, a young man named Rodriguez, who had the organized manner of someone thorough and patient, arrived 45 minutes later. I showed him the driveway, the pillars, the chain, the padlock, the Mercedes inside. I showed him photographs I had taken when I arrived home showing the chain on the ground. I showed him the text messages from my previous conversations with Pamela about the driveway situation, which I had kept on my phone. I showed him the HOA approval documentation for the pillars and chain. I said my property had been specifically secured against unauthorized parking, and someone had bypassed that security to park their vehicle on my private property. He said he understood the situation and went to Pamela's door. He was at Pamela's door for approximately 20 minutes. When he came back, he had the particular manner of a deputy who has heard an explanation that did not satisfactorily address the situation. He said Pamela had described pressing on the chain and the lock releasing, and had characterized the parking as temporary and unintentional. He said there was a factual dispute about the chain mechanism that was difficult to resolve at the scene, but that he was going to note in the report that my property had been secured and had been accessed without my permission, and that a vehicle not belonging to me had been placed on my property inside a locked security barrier. He said he was recommending I have the lock inspected and potentially replaced, and he was informing Pamela that any future entry to my driveway without my explicit permission would be treated as a chargeable trespass. He asked me whether I would like to open the chain and allow the vehicle to be removed. I said yes. Now that the situation was documented in a police report, I was happy to open the chain. I opened the padlock, moved the chain to the side, and stepped back. Deputy Rodriguez walked back to Pamela's house and knocked on the door. She came out, she had been watching from the window, I was certain, and walked to my driveway with the specific carriage of a woman trying to maintain dignity in a situation that had not retained much of it. She got in the Mercedes, backed out without looking in my direction, and drove to her own house. I closed the chain and relocked it. Deputy Rodriguez said he was finished, gave me the report number, and left. I went back inside and finished my pot roast, which had held its temperature admirably. Marcus said, Mom, I said, I know. He said, you planned all of that. I said I had planned the part where we relocked the chain. The part where she came to the door I had expected. The part where I called the police I had thought about. The part where she sat on the porch and then went home I had hoped for but not relied on. He said, the pot roast timing was intentional too, wasn't it? I said a good pot roast takes care of itself and requires very little attention during service, which makes it an appropriate meal for an evening when other things require attention. He looked at me for a while and then laughed, genuinely, in the way he has laughed since he was a child, and said, Dad would have loved this. I said Gerald would have handled it differently. He would have talked to her very plainly across the fence weeks earlier, and she would have understood from the way he talked that there was nothing more to discuss. Marcus said, but your way works too. I said it appeared to. I called an attorney the next morning, not because I believed I needed one urgently, but because I am the kind of person who closes loops. His name was Stuart Alden, a general practice attorney in Tarrant County who I had used for my estate documents after Gerald passed. I described the situation and the police report and asked whether there was anything I should do proactively. Stuart said the police report was the right documentation and that if Pamela repeated the behavior, a civil trespass action was straightforward given the report history. He said the chain situation was one where I might consider upgrading the padlock to a higher security model, which would make any future, the lock released when I pressed on it, explanation considerably harder to sustain. I said that was a good suggestion. He said the pillars and chain were excellent in his view. They established a clear physical boundary and a clear security measure, and any entry past that security without permission was unambiguous. He said, "Lorraine, you've done this correctly. Keep the documentation, upgrade the lock, and you're in good shape." I bought a new padlock, a heavy-duty American lock number 700, which is a different security level from the master number 3, and which does not release under lateral pressure regardless of how firmly someone presses on the chain while claiming to be just checking whether it is secure. Marcus installed it that weekend, along with a small camera he mounted on the near pillar pointing at the chain and padlock, a weatherproof unit with night vision and motion detection that sent an alert to his phone and mine whenever motion was detected in the driveway entrance area. 2 weeks after the police report, the HOA management company sent Pamela a letter. I had been copied, which was how I knew, noting the incident, noting the police report, and stating that the board expected residents to respect other residents' private property security measures and that any further incidents would be reviewed by the board for possible covenant violation proceedings. I had not asked the HOA to send this letter. The management company had done so on their own initiative after the board president, a woman named Gail Horton, who I had known for 12 years, had called to express concern and to check on me, which I appreciated more than I said. Pamela Voss has not been in my driveway since the evening of the pot roast and the police report. I know this with the certainty of a woman who has a camera on the pillar and who checks the motion logs on her phone most mornings with the same routine attention she gives to her weather app and her email. The log shows the camera triggering for wind, for the occasional cat, for the mailman approaching from the side, and for the numerous birds who have discovered the pillar top as a perching location, which I did not anticipate when designing the installation and which I find genuinely charming. Not once has the camera recorded a vehicle approaching the chain from the outside. The chain hangs between the pillars at bumper height. The American lock holds. The brick has weathered beautifully through one winter and into the second spring, taking on the particular quality of brick that has been properly sealed and has begun to feel permanent rather than recently placed. The right half of my driveway is mine to use as I choose, when I choose, for whom I choose, which is the condition that has always applied, and that I was not required to defend through anything more dramatic than a padlock, 2 brick pillars, a pot roast, and a phone call to the sheriff's non-emergency line. Gerald's family came for Easter. I removed the chain, as I always planned to, and there was room for everyone. When they left, I replaced the chain and snapped the lock shut. That is how the thing works. Open when I choose, closed when I choose. Mine, in the quiet and complete sense that anything is yours when you have built the thing that marks it and secured it and are the only one who holds the key. I went back inside and watered my seedlings, which were doing very well for late April.